So today we're going to be looking at the Battle of Varna. Let's get to it.
With the signing of the Peace of Szeged during the summer of 1444, many political actors in the Ottoman capital thought the costly and bloody Hungarian conflict of the last year had finally concluded. A steady peace had fallen upon the Balkans as an independent and neutral buffer state in the form of Serbia had been re-established, and prisoner swaps between Edirne and Buda took place. A 10-year truce had also been established between the two sides, which gave into the illusion that the wars of the last few years had indeed concluded for good. Likewise,
Yeah, but he also mentioned last video it was a duplicitous peace, as Europe still wanted to war, so I'm thinking Europe is about to, like, backstab the Ottomans.
peace with the Karamanids was secured in August for the price of handing over the border towns of Akşehir and Beyşehir back to the Bay of Konya. Peace in the west and east had been secured. Now that he was presiding over a peacetime government, Sultan Murad II began taking steps to ensure the future of his imperial dynasty and sultanate. The last 12 months had been personally tragic and militarily disastrous for the Sultan of the Ottomans. In addition to the major military defeats of 1443 and the humiliating peace settlement of 1444, he had also lost his beloved son and heir apparent Şehzade Alaeddin in a horse riding accident in Anatolia. While his favourite son was being buried in Bursa, Murad called for his sole living son, Şehzade Mehmed, to depart from the province of Amasya, where he was governor, and go to the Ottoman capital at once. With a steady peace in Europe secured, the Ottoman Sultan wished to abdicate his throne to his 12-year-old son and retire from.
So I believe this is the famed Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror. Another really great guy in history to learn about, and the guy who essentially kills Rome. Yeah, I believe this is the man. Frickin' taking control at 12, man. Metal.
Public life. The wars and politicking of the.
Okay, translation of a poem written by Murad. Shall I accord with the solitude, leave the rest all, and take the companion of the soul? Yeah, Murad's been through a lot. He's fighting on all fronts. Like, you know, he's probably been through a lot.
The last 23 years had left Murad mentally exhausted. As a result, he wanted to indulge himself in philosophy and spiritualism at his garden palace in Manisa, away from the scheming halls of Edirne. Many in the Ottoman court initially frowned upon the Sultan's abdication plans, as his successor was a relatively inexperienced member of the House of Osman. It was only after some political persuasion by Murad, on the basis of securing a peaceful transition of power for the Sultanate, that the plan was finalized. Many still remembered the chaotic ascensions of Mehmed I and Murad II, and the civil wars that engulfed the first years of their reigns. With the constant threat of Orhan Çelebi from Constantinople always being ever present, Ottoman statesmen and the religious ulema respected their sultan's wishes to retire. By late August 1444, Şehzade Mehmed had arrived in the Ottoman capital and was proclaimed sultan as Mehmed II, while his father travelled off to Manisa.
Heck yeah, Mehmed II has entered the battle. I love how I kind of respect he just retired. Dude literally said, you know what, ruling's hard. I want to go talk about philosophy and spiritualism. So you, 12-year-old, take control. Bye. I kind of respect that. It's kind of baller. Dude just retired from being the ruler. I don't know. I kind of like that.
With the majority of the Ottoman army in Anatolia and a boy sultan now residing in Edirne, the push for another crusade had become incredibly popular within Wladyslaw's court in Buda. The Polish-Hungarian monarch had already pledged to continue his war against the Muslims even during the peace talks of the summer, but the surprising news of Murad II's sudden retirement and a child now occupying the Ottoman throne had given more life to the young king's ambitions. More good news came at the end of August, when a combined naval fleet from the Papacy, Venice and Burgundy began their promised joint blockade of the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits. while the Ottoman navy stationed at Gallipoli was perplexed about whether or not an official war had broken out, even more good news arrived for Wladyslaw. During the first weeks of fall, the Ottoman capital of Edirne was engulfed in a destructive fire that saw the destruction of over 2,000 homes and buildings, a sign interpreted by the Crusaders as God's approval for the upcoming military campaign. With the Ottomans already distracted by various...
Yeah, they're about to backstab the Ottomans and be like, well, alright, let's jump them. Like, again, on paper, everything seems great, right? They are blockaded, there's fire, a literal child is in control, everything seems primed and ready for the Crusaders to deal a death blow. But little do they know, they're not messing with just any child, they're messing with the conqueror. So, I guess we'll see. Knowing what a menace Mehmed becomes, like, you know, there's a lot of hype. If this had been anyone else, I'd be like, man, he's screwed. But, again, knowing what Mehmed becomes, like, I'm like, oh boy. You know? This is quite the time to abdicate and give your son the reins. Granted, I don't think Murad knew about this happening, obviously he didn't, but you know what I mean. Still, though.
Internal issues, the ball was in the court of Buda to open the first salvos in the upcoming war. Having already mustered men and materials in the summer, the Crusader host of 20,000, under Hunyadi and Wladyslaw, crossed the Danube at the border town of Osova into Ottoman Bulgaria on the 18th of September, much to the shock and horror of Edirne.
Yeah, they just straight up broke their treaty.
Although the following military expedition was a crusade on paper, it did not receive military or fiscal help from the other major powers of Europe, such as France, England, the Holy Roman Empire, Castile and Aragon. Like the long campaign from a year prior, the expedition was again to be a mainly Polish-Hungarian endeavour. Attempts to incite Christian revolts in Ottoman lands and to ally with independent Balkan leaders in the region against Mehmed had also failed to bring any results for Wladyslaw. The already ongoing Albanian revolt, led by Skanderbeg, had no means to march to the aid of the Crusaders while fighting an insurgency in their country, while Vlad II of Wallachia wished to keep his country far from the war to come. Only a light cavalry force of around a few thousand, led by the latter ruler's son, the formerly crowned Mehmed II, was reluctantly given for the Crusader cause. Even Juraj Branković of Serbia, having already regained his lands during the peace talks of the summer, stayed neutral in the crusade to come, and paradoxically warned Hunyadi in person that the expedition was doomed to fail. The little help that did come from the local region had also failed to take root, such as John VIII's release of Orhan Çelebi into the Balkans, which failed to gather enough followers to incite a new Ottoman civil war. In spite of...
Yeah, okay, so essentially Hungary-Poland is essentially on its own. I love how everyone pushed them into like, yeah, go for, you know, go for it, and then now they're just kind of left hung and dry, completely alone, without really any major support, like everyone got cold feet. That's kind of already telling. The Crusaders hard, at least with most of Europe, wasn't in it, you know? So yeah, that sucks.
These developments, the military campaign continued on, as morale was high. Like with the long campaign the year prior, the main goal of the new crusade was to re-establish a number of Christian buffer states in the Balkans, while at the same time coming to the aid of Constantinople. After spending 4 days crossing the Danube, the Crusader army retraced the steps of King Sigismund's fabled crusade of 48 years past by marching eastwards, hugging the southern bank of the Danube. The Ottoman towns of Vidin and Oryahovo were captured and sacked in short sieges, and again their Turkish garrisons and inhabitants were slain. On the 20th of October, the fortress town of Nicopolis also fell to the Crusaders, thus avenging the events of 1396. Believing that the bulk of the
Again, things don't look pretty good on the... Like I said, I think it's pretty telling how essentially Poland/Hungary was kind of left on its own, while everyone else doesn't really seemingly want to be involved, so that's a pretty bad sign. But they still have John Hunyadi, And that's pretty dangerous. I think, if anything, they have that going for them. Who's really great at fighting the Ottomans, and who even gave Murad a tough time, so... yeah, that's probably their biggest advantage there, his military prowess.
The Ottoman army was stranded in Anatolia due to the blockade. The Crusaders began their forced march on Edirne by following the Osam River south, in order to pass through the Shipka Pass. Unbeknownst to them, the former Sultan Murad and his grand host were merely a week's march south.
Oh.
A month?
Okay, so I think they're about to get surprise jumped right now.
Prior, the initial Crusader invasion had caused a mass general panic in Edirne, as many thought Hunyadi was weeks away from sacking what was left of their burnt-down city. As a makeshift moat was being constructed around the Ottoman capital.
During this time around, Ottoman officials were busy transferring valuable items from towns to prevent the Crusaders from obtaining them.
Mehmed II's advisors sent urgent letters to an obstinate Murad who was in Manisa, but to no avail. The former Sultan insisted that he had abdicated the throne, and that now the current crisis was for his son to solve.
He really just said, well, the boy's gotta learn, just, you know, not my problem. He really just said that I fail to see how that's my problem. That's wild. Thank goodness Mehmed actually proves to be great at the end, or else this... if it had been anyone else, I'd be like, this guy kind of sucks for leaving his son out there. But I'm like, nah, knowing how Mehmed becomes so great, you know, I'm like, oh well.
Furious at his father, Mehmed wrote a personal letter stating to him that, if imperial power and the Sultanate belong to you, you are obliged to defend them against the enemy. Otherwise, if these things now belong to me, then it is necessary to obey the Sultan and take control of the army.
Ooh, mic drop. Dropping bars on his dad, and he's completely right too.
Accepting his son's plea for help, Murad left his secluded garden palace and began gathering the army of Anatolia for war. After a few days, the army was readied, and the march toward Europe began in earnest. Knowing that a quite significant Crusader navy blockaded the straits, the former Ottoman Sultan decided to take his chances and cross into Europe across the more lightly blockaded Bosphorus Strait to the north. With the help of Grand Vizier Jandali Halil Pasha the Younger, the Ottoman Anatolian army crossed into Europe under the protection of cannon fire from the Anadolu Hisar, much to the dismay of the Crusaders. However, the crossing wouldn't have been possible in the first place without the transport ships deployed by the Genoese, as they were fearful of potential Venetian gains from the crusade, and so supported Edirne's war effort. The unexpected strait crossing was to be a turning point in the crusade, as Edirne now had a proper army and a military leader capable of facing head-on the White Knight of Transylvania. Meanwhile, in Bulgaria...
That's hilarious how Europe shot itself in the foot there, with the Genoese and whatnot. Again, Europe is... maybe on paper they might be on the same page with Crusades, but still their self-interest rules at the end. And they will like turn on each other for greater gain, while meanwhile the Ottomans are united in defending their homeland. So I imagine John Hunyadi probably isn't expecting an army and they're gonna get the drop on him and just completely jump him.
The unaware Crusaders had begun their siege of Tarnovo, the former seat of the old Bulgarian Empire. However, the following siege of the town was to be disastrous for the Crusaders, as Ottoman sallying out parties seized and destroyed many of their supply wagons. Low on supplies, Hunyadi ordered the army to head east to the Black Sea coast, where the Crusader fleet could resupply them, thus temporarily abandoning the march towards Edirne. Along the long and fraught journey, the Ottoman towns of Shumen, Madara and Provadia were burned to the ground. By the first week of November, the army had reached the Ottoman coastal fortress of Varna and captured it after a quick siege. It was also during this period that the shocking news of Murad's arrival into Europe reached the Crusader camp. Mehmed II and...
yeah, they weren't expecting him to show up again. The Crusaders keep getting caught off guard. That seems to be their biggest thing, though.
His father had spent the better part of the last month mustering a sizable Ottoman army at Edirne and Stara Zagora. Like during the long campaign, Murad declared a jihad against the invaders as a means to muster men into the ranks of the army on short notice. By the first week of November, the army was readied for war. Leaving the young Ottoman Sultan in the care of the Grand Vizier back in the capital, Murad marched out of the city at the head of a 40,000-strong army. For the next week, the Muslim army...
40,000. How much does the Crusaders have? 20,000 before? Oh boy, those numbers. I mean, granted, numerical superiority isn't everything, but that's still a pretty bad spot to be in.
Army followed the main road up to Yambol and continued up to Aitos. Wanting to cut the Crusaders off from the west, the former Ottoman Sultan crossed the Kamchia River on November 7th and entered Provadia the next day. By the 9th of November, Transylvanian scouts of John Hunyadi had spotted Murad's grand host marching in from the west towards Varna. Being cornered with the sea to their backs and the supply fleet nowhere to be seen, the Crusader Council decided to engage the Ottoman army the following morning. In the War Council, Hunyadi declared, "To escape is impossible, to surrender is unthinkable. Let us fight with bravery and honor our arms." The climactic battle that would determine the fate.
That is a bad position. They've essentially been cornered, yeah. They came in with all the momentum and immediately have been reversed. Now they're in a position where they have no supplies, they can't escape, and they can't surrender, or won't surrender. And now they're forced to give a battle. That's so bad. Oh boy.
Of the entire military campaign seemed to be on the horizon, and its location was to be at Varna. On the morning of November 10th, both the armies of Murad and Wladyslaw III assembled on a plain overlooking the fortress of Varna. To the east lay the Black Sea, while Lake Varna and the forested Franga Plateau lay to the south and north respectively. The former Ottoman Sultan deployed his men in a crescent formation across the entire mouth of the plain, stretching for over 5 miles. Anatolian Beylerbey Kareja Pasha led the right wing of the army, alongside the Anatolian Tamali Sepahis, while Rumelian Beylerbey Shahabeddin Pasha led the left wing of the army alongside the Balkan Tamali Sepahis. Meanwhile, the former Ottoman Sultan himself commanded the center alongside his heavy Kapikulu Sipahi cavalry, elite Janissary infantry, and a small unit of artillery. In the vanguard of the entire army were the light Azab infantry, armed with maces, bows, and axes. In the center of the army line, they were protected by a trench and a wall of iron palisades. Lastly, a unit of light Akunja cavalry was stationed on the far left, on the Franga Plateau. The Crusader army was half the size of the Ottoman host, numbering around 20,000 men. However, like in the previous battles of Kosovo and Nicopolis, the Christian army made up for its inferior numbers with its superior armor.
Yeah, we've seen this in the past. Even when Europe lost, they still inflicted heavy damage to their enemies, right? Like, they may have lost, but they could still do a heavy damage to their enemy armies. And I imagine they probably will do this. I mean, man, this is a really bad position to be in for them. But I imagine they'll go down swinging. They lack quantity, but they do have quality.
John Hunyadi's brother-in-law, Michael Selagi, led the left wing, which consisted of Transylvanian heavy knights and light hussar cavalry. Many in this flank were hardened veterans of the long campaign and other military campaigns against Edirne, and so had prior experience in fighting against the Ottomans. King Wladyslaw III and John Hunyadi commanded the center, which consisted of the king's personal mounted bandarium, heavy mounted knights from Hungary and Poland, and mercenary infantry from Germany. Conversely, Bishop John de Dominus of Oradea led the Crusader right wing, which consisted of heavy infantry from Hungary and light infantry and cavalry from Bosnia and Croatia. They were joined by a small group of heavy Western knights, led by Cardinal Julian Cesarini, and Wallachian light cavalry led by Prince Mircea, stationed in the rear. Lastly, behind the entire Crusader army was a line of fortified war wagons, crewed by Czech mercenaries armed with crossbows and small artillery pieces.
Before the battle, Murad II had a copy of the Peace of Seged pierced on a stake and promptly displayed as a symbolic reaction to the Crusaders' breach. Yeah, they really did screw over the Ottomans with that one. Very unhonorable.
The battle began with a general charge of the left flanks of both armies. Starting on the Hungarian left, Michael Szilágyi led his Transylvanian heavy knights and light hussar cavalry into the lightly armoured ranks of the Ottoman Anatolian army. The following melee was to be one-sided, as the Anatolian Azabs and Sepahis were overwhelmed by some of the best warriors Christendom had to offer. As war trumpets littered the battlefield, the Wallachian cavalry under Mircea entered the fray, protecting Szilágyi's right flank from an Ottoman counterattack from the centre. With the Azab light infantry unable to penetrate the heavy armour of the Crusader knights, and now being cut down by the highly mobile hussar cavalry, the entire Ottoman right flank began to break into a total rout. Wanting to encourage his fellow men during the heat of the battle, and spurred on to not retreat in the face of great odds, Karaca Pasha and his personal bodyguard charged into the Crusader advance, but to no avail. In only a matter of moments, the Anatolian Beylerbey was cut to pieces, and as a result, the shattered remains of the Ottoman right fled the battlefield.
Holy crap. Yeah, again, it's so many of those, like the hussars and just the knights, so many veterans on the right. It was pretty rough, like the positioning. Like any Ottoman contingent on the right was already up for a big battle, so I can't even blame them for losing that. But the fact that Murad has already lost one of his flanks is pretty insane off the bat. Like, again, these knights, even when they lose, they still can do a lot of damage to you.
Decisively won the first phase of the battle, but elsewhere the battle for Varna was still dragging on. On the Ottoman left, the initial charge of Shehabeddin Pasha and his Akunja cavalry from the Franga Plateau had seen tremendous success. The Ottoman offensive on the Crusader right had resulted in John de Dominus's forces being pushed back to the war wagons in a total rout. Even a cavalry charge led by John Hunyadi himself was driven back as the most experienced soldiers in the Ottoman provincial army slashed their way through the ranks of the Crusader right. It was during this retreat that an arrow partially pierced the helmet of the Transylvanian magnate as he fled to safety.
Dang, holy crap. So, while having little to no while completely getting destroyed on the right, they are doing really well on the left though.
Having captured 4 Crusader banners in the initial advance, the Ottoman left continued pushing forward in the direction of the Black Sea in order to finish off the Crusader right. However, the pursuing advance was soon to be halted by the immense gunfire of the war wagons in the Crusaders' rear, in addition to a heroic last stand led by Cesarini and his Western volunteers. It was also during this period in the battle that reinforcements from the Crusader left and centre began trickling down to aid the shattered but still standing Crusader right flank, much to the trepidation of Murad. Even the Polish-Hungarian king and his personal bodyguard had entered the fray of battle, thus ensuring the stabilization of the Crusader right. Witnessing that his foe now outnumbered him, Shehabeddin Pasha began regrouping his exhausted forces back to the mouth of the plain and the Franga Plateau.
Still, a lot of success on the left, but ultimately they were pushed back.
Nevertheless, almost half of the forces of the Rumelian Beylerbey were lost or routed in the retreat. Despite the fact that the struggle had been ongoing for only several hours, thousands of soldiers on both sides and their steeds littered the plain overlooking Varna. The stench of bloodied corpses, gunpowder and sweat, in addition to the groans of the wounded, echoed across the battlefield. Much of the Ottoman army had either fled the field or were killed in battle, while the exhausted Crusader army had also sustained heavy casualties of their own. As a result of the bloody toll suffered in the struggle for Varna and the hot afternoon sun now shining above the battlefield, a pause in the fighting took place between the two armies. With the exception of the Wallachians, who were plundering the former camp of Karaca Bey, The bloodied and jumbled Crusader army now began regrouping its forces for a final assault on the Ottoman center.
Yeah, that's the thing though, like, you know, the Crusaders are still in enemy territory, and, you know, don't seem that they can't resupply. At least the ships aren't showing up. They're deep in enemy territory. They're basically trapped right here and have to break free if they want to escape. Like, they don't really have the luxury of resting or time on their side compared to the Ottomans. So they need to get the heck out quicker. Oh boy, man.
During this pause, John Hunyadi, Wladyslaw III, and the rest of the Crusader leadership met behind the protection of the war wagons to discuss their next moves. The White Knight of Transylvania urged his monarch to regroup and rest the army while waiting for Murad's exhausted host to either make a desperate attack on their positions or withdraw from the battlefield. In contrast, the young king's advisors instead urged their monarch to take the fight to the former Ottoman Sultan, as much
Yeah, I would go with John Hunyadi's plan, which is more safe.
of the enemy army had already been dispersed. What followed was a furious power struggle between the Polish-Hungarian nobility and the Transylvanian nobility led by Hunyadi over the approval of their monarch. At the end of the meeting, the 20-year-old Wladyslaw had fallen victim to his own vanity and thus sided with the former group. The king drew his sword and led a group of around 500 heavy-mounted knights in a charge directed to the Ottoman center. As Hunyadi had predicted, the former Ottoman Sultan was in the process of withdrawing from the battlefield.
Holy crap. Dude, you should have listened to John Hunyadi, man. Like, the man knows what he's doing. Oh, that sucks. Again, vanity and bad decisions once again catch the Crusaders off guard.
But upon seeing the enemy king's royal standards charging towards him, he prepared for a final engagement. Almost immediately, Wladyslaw and his mounted knights were bogged down in the iron palisades protecting the Ottoman center, in which many succumbed to gunfire and arrows while trying to breach the fortifications. After a short and bloody struggle, a path was opened up over the fortifications, and the Crusader knights charged into a group of entrenched Azabs and elite Janissaries. Many on both sides were slain in the gruesome hand-to-hand combat. Seeing the Ottoman royal tent off in the distance during the heat of battle, Wladyslaw and his personal guard broke off from the main group of knights and began their charge toward Murad.
This is insane. This entire situation is insane right now. Oh man, dude. Again, I would have gone with John Hunyadi's plan, dude. Like, just wait. Just wait for them to retreat, which they were doing apparently, and just get out while they could. But now this is a full-on gambit. And now this dude, the king of Hungary and Poland, is going for it. He's like freaking Leroy Jenkins. He's just running in there, and he's gonna try to murder Murad, I'm guessing. I think he's gonna get him. He could get himself killed, seriously. Like, I think the plan is. Let's see how this goes. If this works out, I'm gonna be shocked if he somehow pulls this off. But this seems incredibly reckless to me.
However, it was during this charge that a member of Murad's personal Sulek guard, a man by the name of Koja Hazir, rose to the occasion and knocked the Polish-Hungarian king off his steed with his battle axe. Laying helpless and dazed on the ground, Wladyslaw gasped his last breath as the guardsman lopped his head off before putting it on top of a pike. Hunyadi, along with his Transylvanian knights, were the first to hear of the king's death, as they had been close behind his fateful final charge. The Transylvanian magnate waged a considerable struggle to retrieve his monarch's corpse all throughout the evening into sunset, but to no avail. Unable to break through the Janissaries, Hunyadi took his portion of the Crusader army and began his retreat up north through the Frenga Plateau under the cover of night. Many were killed during the hectic retreat, as Ottoman Akunje horsemen trapped many lost Crusaders in the numerous dark ravines of the plateau. By the following morning, Murad had regrouped his remaining forces with Shahabedin Pasha's left flank and began spreading the surprising news of Wladyslaw's death.
Again, if he had not rushed there, he could have lived and probably escaped. That was reckless. Really dumb. But this worked out great for the Ottomans. Freaking Murad, man. He got it, bro.
For all to hear. This resulted in many Ottoman units that had been routed the previous day returning to the battlefield, as morale in the Muslim camp once again went up. Meanwhile, the remaining Crusader army at Varna had camped overnight behind their war wagons, believing they had won a great victory for Christendom, not knowing the disaster that befell their valiant leader. It wasn't until the reformed Ottoman army had marched up to their camp and showcased the severed head of Wladyslaw on a pike that any Crusader notion of victory over the Turks disappeared. The second struggle for Varna lasted until the evening, when the remaining demoralized and leaderless Crusader troops broke under the weight of a full-on Ottoman assault. While Mircea and Michael Salagi barely fled the battlefield with their lives, John de Dominus of Oradea, Cardinal Julian Cesarini, and the rest of the Christian army perished in the heat of battle. And with that, the Battle of Varna was over.
Dang.
The Battle of Varna had resulted in a Pyrrhic victory for the Ottoman Sultanate. Although the war between Edirne and Buda persisted for another half-decade, the victory at Varna ensured Ottoman presence in the Balkans for centuries to come. The Crusade of Varna was the last time Christian powers made a major effort to expel the Ottoman Turks from Europe under papal backing. The battle had also politically destabilized Hungary and Poland, as both nations were engulfed in respective succession crises.
Yeah, so this is where we're gonna end the video. Again, they played a really dangerous game and lost. Should have listened to John Hunyadi, but oh well.